I came up to see her and I just fell in love with her immediately, because she had nearly been totally lost. I thought, well, she really deserves to be preserved.
Peter, what is it that's so special about Nancy?
Well, umpteen things actually. First of all, she belonged to Arthur Ransome, famous children's author, Swallows and Amazons. Secondly, he put her in one of his books, which was We Didn't Mean to Go to Sea. And that's the one where the children inadvertently sail over to Holland by themselves after having lost their skipper and floated out of Harwich Harbour.
What else is so special about this boat?
It's an ordinary production Hillyard yacht from the 1930s. Hillyard's the boat builders in Littlehampton. She was built there in 1931. Ransome found her when he was looking for a boat, having moved down from the Lake District to this area to get some what they called sea sailing. They wanted to graduate up from dinghies on the lakes to proper sailing out at sea. He found this boat in Poole Harbour. He sailed her back here from Poole Harbour, immediately ran into a huge gale off Yarmouth on the Isle of Wight, took shelter there, carried on, still bloody awful weather. At one stage the navigation lights blew out on him, and he had to improvise a port light with a red plastic plate and a torch to frighten off the Harwich Flushing steamer, which incident turns up in We Didn't Mean to Go to Sea. So it was a really rough passage for Ransome, and I think that actually the inspiration for the book came not so much from just the boat herself, but from that passage home. That was his first time he'd done some sea sailing for about 10 years, and as he said, I felt very young and inexperienced. And I think that whole experience came together and turned into this book, which is really one of the classics of sailing. So that's what Nancy's given to the world, basically.
Tell me, how does Nancy sail?
Well, she's a more technical boat to sail, obviously, than modern plastic ones. As a cutter rig, when you're tacking, for example, you've got running backstays, so you will always have, before you tack, tighten the backstay to support the mast, and then when you tack her, as well as the main, you've got a staysail and a jib. She's quite a heavy boat, so she is very slow through the tack, and in fact I was sailing her in quite light winds just this weekend, and we actually weren't even able to tack her. The waves kept knocking her back. We only had about a knot and a half, 2 knots of boat speed, and it wasn't quite enough to get her through the wind, and I ended up having to jibe her round. But normally she's a lovely boat to sail. We sailed her at the weekend with one reef in, and with one reef and the staysail and the jib, she's actually very well balanced on the helm. We got a fairly calm sea. We were just off Walton Backwaters. We'd been in Walton Backwaters, which in Ransome parlance is secret water. So we'd been in there, we were coming back, and the helm was so light that you could probably just hold the tiller with a single finger, or in fact not hold it at all, and with that rig she was very well balanced. A couple of years ago we repeated the voyage going over to Holland. I was actually the mate on that trip, so for the trust we have, when we do a passage like that, our rules are that we have 2 qualified skippers on board for obvious safety reasons. We were in probably a force 4 gusting force 6, so it was sort of the upper end of the limit for what we like to take Nancy out in, but we were actually dunking the bowsprit occasionally as we went over, because it was quite a typical sort of short North Sea, choppy sea, but she actually sails really well. She's a long keel, so it does mean that when you're handling her at close quarters in a marina, if there's tide around, you do have to be very careful. But I mean, I really enjoy sailing her.
The boat was saved by Mike Rhines, who bought it from the owner, who didn't seem to be bothered that it was in Scarborough Harbour on its side with a hole in it. He began to do some renovation, and that was in 1990, about 94. He began to do some renovation work on it and then ran out of money, and by that time he discovered the Arthur Ransome Society, and from the Arthur Ransome Society a splinter group of those members also then formed the Nancy Blackett Trust under the aegis of Peter Willis, who used to work for Classic Boat, so he had a lot of contacts. That all began in 1997, so the Nancy Blackett Trust was formed in 1997, and it was formed to keep Nancy Blackett sailing, to keep her as close as possible to how she was when Arthur Ransome sailed on her, and also to keep her as close to the fictional boat, which is in We Didn't Mean to Go to Sea, which is to all intents and purposes Nancy Blackett, but it's simply renamed the Goblin in the book. All the pictures in the book are of Nancy. All the things that happen on board Nancy are what happens on the Goblin, so it's absolutely correct. So we want to keep that spirit alive as well. So there are people who come on board and go all excited because it's an old Hillyard. There are people who come on board and are excited because it's a ship that was owned by Arthur Ransome. And then again, you've got people who come on board, and I've had grown men crying in the fore cabin because it's the Goblin and it brings them back to their childhood and the first time they read We Didn't Mean to Go to Sea.
Where did Ransome sleep? Which was his bunk?
Ransome slept on the bunk that I'm sitting on, which is the starboard bunk in the main section. This is still where the skipper would usually sleeps when we do voyages on board here. And then so this was John's bunk, John being the eldest of the 4 children in the story, with one of the swallows, and Roger was slept on the other bunk, because then the boys were in the same section. It was all very gender correct. And then Susan slept on the starboard bunk again, in the fore cabin. That's the one I usually sleep in, and the smallest one is where Titty used to sleep.
So you own a little part of Ransome history.
Yes.
That must be fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. And it's magical to be able to be on a little ship like this that's got such a lot of history. It just ties together all of the things that Ransome held dear, which particularly are ships, but also are young people enjoying the water and being able to explore and have adventures and all the things that us adults, well, actually we still rather like doing. It brings you back to your childhood almost, which is a lovely thing.
So what is it that is actually so special about this boat?
Oh, she's beautiful and feels special when you're in her. If you're tying it up with the stories, then it is the fictional boat come to life, and you feel that you could do anything that Ransome puts in the book, you can do with Nancy Blackett. and it does work. She inspires people as well. She inspires children to go on and do more sailing and on other vessels, and it just makes you really inspired to want to sail on her, really.
So which bit of it is magical for you?
Waking up on board actually is amazing, or in the evening when we've got the Primus lamps lit and you've got that soft glow that's enough to sit and drink a glass of wine by and chatter, but not terribly good for actually reading, so you end up just sitting around and nattering, and just relaxing, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.